welcome everyone. We'll give it just another minute as people start to trickle in. For the time being, can you put your name, why don't you put your name, your organization, and where you're from in the chat, and we'll get started in just one moment. All right, so we'll get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's event, APAP ArtsForward's monthly reopening webinar. My name is Willie Santiago, and I am the Manager of Programs and Resources at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I use he, they pronouns, and I am a fair-skinned Hispanic person with short brown wavy hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a lavender shirt and blue cardigan and clear white glasses. I would like to take this moment to acknowledge that APAP is located in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway, Anacostan, and Pamunkey people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I would like to pay my respect to the elders, both past and present. Closed captioning will appear automatically on the bottom of your screen. If you would like to disable the chat transcript, please click More on the bottom of the Zoom window and click on Hide Subtitle. We are joined today by ASL interpreters from Purple, Jessica Tucker and Malia Lewis, as well as APAP's conference associate, JG Jecker, who will be assisting with tech today. Thank you all for collaborating with us. Participants on today's webinar will have the opportunity to ask questions during portions of today's roundtable. At APAP, we follow stack procedure to monitor and determine speaking order for asking questions or raising discussion points. If you would like to speak or ask a question, please type stack in the chat, and APAP staff will be monitoring the chat during today's discussion. And we will call on people in the order that the stack has determined. You are also welcome to include any questions that you have within the chat as well if you're not able to come on camera or come off of mute. APAP is your go-to resource for the connections and resources you need to build your career as a performing arts professional in the presenting, booking, and touring field. Join APAP as we move the arts forward. We know that right now many in our field are still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic. For that reason, APAP is still offering flexible no barriers memberships through the end of June. If you are interested in joining APAP and learning more about our flexible membership dues, please contact us at info@apap365.org. I'll now turn things over to our Director of Programs and Resources, Krista Bradley.
Well, thanks, Willie. Hi, everybody. I'm Krista Bradley, and I'm Director of Programs and Resources at APAP. I use the pronouns she, her, and I am a brown-skinned Black woman with black, short, curly hair, and I'm wearing dark blue glasses and a pink scarf. I'm calling in from Silver Spring, Maryland, the lands of the Piscataway and the Pamunkey people. Today's session is part of our ArtsForward program initiative made possible with the generous support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. APAP's ArtsForward program supports the presenting and touring field safe, vibrant, and equitable reopening and recovery as presenters, artists, and audiences reconnect, tours resume, and venues reopen. As part of ArtsForward, APAP launched the APAP ArtsForward Reopening Survey back in February with our research partner, AMS Planning and Research. This important 8-month-long initiative will gather invaluable longitudinal data from performing arts presenters, venues, agents, managers, artists, producers, and track field-wide trends in reopening and resuming programming, booking, and touring activities. So today we've organized this update a little bit differently if you've joined us for other ones. We are using a meeting format rather than a webinar format. So you will be able to be on camera. You can join the discussion using the chat function and the stack protocol that Willie explained. And in addition to the data that our friends at AMS Planning and Research will be offering, we're also joined by field peers who will respond to the data and share real-time insights, reflections, and experiences regarding the findings. We also want you to participate in this discussion as well, so we look forward to seeing and hearing your reflections and comments for a more interactive discussion and conversation and learning environment among our colleagues. Participants on today's webinar, I'm sorry, I missed a page. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you? I mentioned that we are already doing monthly survey updates to report on these findings, and this survey will run until September, and we'll deploy the surveys to different facets of our sector each month. And I know that our AMS planning and research folks will be mentioning that we're reopening a new survey today for the next round. So with all that, let's be joined by our panel. We are joined today by Stephen Wolf, Principal of AMS Planning and Research, and Christian Otten, Project Manager at AMS. We're also joined by our special guests and peers from the field, Karen Fisher, President, Pacifica Artists Network, Thea Knowlton, Senior Vice President and Booking Manager with IMG Artists, and Dr. Manuel Prestamo, President of PMI, Performance Management International. Thank you all for joining us and for sharing the insights you'll share with colleagues. Welcome.
Thanks, Krista. Glad to be back. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is the fourth in our series of presentations on the APAP ArtsForward study. I'm Steve Wolf. I'm the principal of AMS Planning and Research. I'm a white man with unfortunately graying hair, wearing glasses, and I'm speaking with you today from the land of the Pequannock, whose elders we acknowledge past, present, and future. I'd like to ask my colleague Christian to introduce himself, and then we'll dive into the findings.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christian Otten. I'm a project manager with AMS Planning and Research. I'm a white male with brown hair. I'm wearing a nice button-down shirt with all sorts of pineapples on it today. And I am calling from the land of Pequannock and the Pugosset as well here in Connecticut. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so let's dive into it. I like always at the top, I want to thank Jesse and Malia, our interpreters. They provide an important service to all of us. Thank you both for being here and keeping up. I'll do my best to be timely or manage my pace. So as you all know, the ArtsForward Reopening Study has two components. Today, we're reporting on the second Artists, Agents, and Agency survey. This survey is a little more tightly defined than the survey that we give to venues and presenters, where we're focusing on reopening status, around activity and demand, around some of the challenges and opportunities we hear, and a little bit around health and safety. Christian and I are going to do about a 25-minute presentation, hopefully not even that long, and then go to our panel and then to open questions. Please do feel to put comments in the chat as well, but as Willie mentioned, using the stack protocol for the opportunity to speak. This second survey had 118 responses. We're really working hard to gather insights on how the field is reopening. And you'll see some interesting data. I think since most of the folks on the phone likely participated in the survey, you'll recognize it. We had responses from all across North America. We had some operators that also have international business. You can see there was a nice mix of agents, managers, or producers, companies or producing organizations, and individual artists. Compared to our opening round of surveys for artists and agents, we had roughly the same distribution by urban area or community setting. We are delighted to see that we did have a statistically measurable increase in the folks responding from rural geographies, and we really encourage folks to continue to do that and encourage your colleagues to do that. We had the same broad distribution of genre that we had last time, and I'll just let Christian talk to us a little bit about activity.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so we want to dig a little bit into what we're finding and keep in mind that as we aggregate this data, you may have different experience, and that's why we have set up the meeting week the way we have to have a conversation about those sort of differences or similarities that you might be observing with the data. Just for some context, and again, you may have seen this in the previous webinars, but we're doing a concurrent study of audiences. And we did see that in May, as we had observed the sentiment of audiences over the last couple of years on a monthly basis, things wax and wane quite a bit based on what the conditions of the virus are at any given moment. And in the last month or so, we've seen a decline in comfort. We're curious to see where that goes from here, but certainly the bump nationwide in COVID cases had an impact on the level of comfort that people were expressing being in different venues. So with that context, what's going on with activity? We see that since the March survey of the artists and the producers and the agents, there's been a 22% increase in activity overall. We see that approaching half of artists and companies had more than 6 performances in the last month. And obviously that is an aggregate figure. But as we look at what the reduction looks like relative to 2019 baseline activity on average, we're improving slowly, but we are improving. And we've only seen in May an aggregate of a 19% reduction from regular activity. So how does that qualify? A lot of artists and a lot of producers now are turning to unlimited capacity activity, 8 and 10 overall. Certainly there are some regional differences that we want to point out that are pretty interesting, and they continue to be interesting across the study. But it is interesting to see that there's more hesitancy to offer unlimited capacity events in the Northeast in particular, and that's been pretty consistent. Also, in terms of the nature of activity, we're seeing fewer rescheduled performances as a percentage of the volume of activity, while there's still just about over half of responding artists and presenters did do some sort of rescheduled activity. That is slightly decreased as of the May deployment, but there's still a continuing amount of rescheduled activity that's comprising what's going on right now. Looking forward, certainly we see that activity in terms of touring and booking is climbing slowly at a metered pace, at least. We've got 3/4 of respondents that say that they are currently booking one-out performances, not routed tours. Just over half have resumed touring, which is an encouraging stat. We've seen that grow, but not in any kind of really significant way yet. There are certainly challenges they're still facing when it comes to touring. And then 70% are looking to the future with their tours as well. Just very quickly, the majority of those, there's quite a bit of recovery going on, and it's actually relatively stagnant compared to what we measured in March, but the majority of recovery here is on nationwide tour activity. That said, there's been improvements in regional and international touring as well in terms of what the volume looked like before the pandemic. A really interesting and important statistic that we've introduced with this survey to the artists and the producers here is a sense of what aggregate bookings look like compared to pre-pandemic levels and aggregate fees. And so overall, not surprisingly, we're seeing reduced fees associated with booking, as well as a reduction in activity bookings overall compared to pre-pandemic. And I'm sure that we'll be talking quite a bit about that with our panelists and with all of you as well. Pretty interesting observation here as well in terms of thinking about when our artists and our producers anticipate returning to a typical schedule of activity. When we looked at the data in March, we understood that there was this expectation that we would be returning to a relatively strong level of typical activity by September of this year. That horizon has been pushed out a little bit here, and I think that's a notable impact of perhaps some of the sentiment that's going on and the waxing and waning of the virus and its impact, as well as the cost of putting on activity and the revamp there. So we'll talk more about that as well. What are you all saying? Well, we're hearing you say that there are still some challenges. There's an interest in putting up tours, but certainly presenters are faced with a number of challenges and a sense of perhaps some risk adversity. It's presenting opportunities, but the big thing that we've been hearing quite a bit from a lot of you is the impact of cost on going out and performing and touring. And again, we're looking forward to hearing from our panelists about that and any insights that you might have and impacts that cost is having on your activity. So I think there's a sense that we really do want to help each other, and the field wants to come together and collate in the way that they need to in order to be successful, but there are some barriers to that. So I think we will want to have a conversation about that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Stephen to talk a little bit about what we're seeing health and safety protocol wise.
Thanks, Christian. And as we make the transition, I just want to underscore a couple of things that you said. So while we're seeing an improvement in activity, if you will, and we're seeing some gains in terms of forward-looking programming, in terms of levels of stuff that is booked and fees that are being generated, we're still well below where we were pre-pandemic, and this sets a frame for us at AMS with our audience work and our institutional work that suggests that what we've been calling the long runway to return is actually more appropriately phrased the long runway reset. And what is that reset? I think will be an important part of the conversation. When we look at health and safety conditions, we're seeing a really significant correlation with the surges of variants as they move away across the country. From our May survey in the Audience Outlook Monitor, some 7,000 audience members around the country, we saw a significant uptick, almost 20%, to once again more than half of audiences thinking that masks should be in place, and the same distribution, the coasts feeling much more strongly than the center of the country and the South. What's really interesting is masks seem to be part of the script these days. The vast majority of folks, now 76%, indicating that they're ready to attend now. This sort of consistent band of 1 in 5 saying, I'm waiting for infection rates to go down. We do have some concern that this may become one of those resets, that there may be a part of our historical audience that may not come back at the rates or the distribution of activity that we saw before. Interestingly, artists and audiences are feeling a little bit differently here. We're seeing some shifts in our May deployment from mask mandates to proof of vaccination. We're seeing negative COVID tests that were more important in March are less important now. But by and large, we're seeing this notion of the virus is here to stay. We have to manage it as we go forward. In terms of artist and manager mandates, this is really interesting data. While from March to May, the overall volume came down, we are seeing the Northeast and the West with significantly higher requirements for both masks and proof of vaccination. I was on the West Coast last week and can tell you that it's very different than when I was in Florida the week before, just on a unit of one experience. Audience support has shifted again regarding vaccinated only admittance. That had been declining precipitously through the early parts of 2022, but it took a slight jump, just measurable, just outside of error. But we thought it was important to share with you that Again, there is again a geographic distribution here, with the coasts feeling much more strongly than the middle of the country or the South. So to bring us towards the panel conversation, just some observations from us. What we're certainly hearing in some of the open-ended comments we're receiving and feedback that we're getting is, the pandemic generated some interesting innovations in how we deliver our work. Some of those may be sticky, some of those may not. We'd be really, really interested. We have great data that suggests that latent demand remains intact. And this is one of the things that we've been pleasantly surprised about. We're seeing it in that 74 to 77% of audiences that they say they are already engaged. But some new variables have jumped into the mix. Rising costs clearly are creating some challenges for artists, for producing companies, as you deliver your work. There's an interesting bit of feedback we're getting that the art makers are saying, well, gee, I'm not sure the audiences are ready to come. From presenters, we're hearing a lot about access to adequate staffing and human resources. And a really important question, outcomes are unknown. How much risk can we take? And another potentially interesting prompt maybe for our panel or for our discussion later about risk. And then the fact that everything changes, right? It's a moving target. It moves all the time. It makes it really, really difficult to manage. So we thought we'd share those. On the other side, where do we go? Well, as I mentioned, this notion about it's a long runway. We're on a slow taxi roll to take off, I guess. And the variability of these surges with different variances makes it really, really difficult to plan. And we hear that certainly from artists, agents who are trying to book content as it goes forward. I think what's really interesting, and I'd love to have some more discussion with the panel about, is how do we deal with the fact that these demands for health safety change all the time, as conditions change, as programming changes. It's already June. We're going to move from the summer into the fall and winter before we know it. And what does it mean? So that's the top line data. What I'd like to do is invite Krista and the panel back. We'll do some more introductions, and then we have some questions to pose.
Fascinating and so insightful, and I was taking notes furiously with questions. So thank you for sharing all that. And if you are so moved to take yourself off of camera, we would love to see you. This is a community, and it is a community discussion, and it makes it a lot easier to do that when we can see each other. But if you're can't do that, we'll understand. But I would encourage everybody to take themselves off of put themselves on camera. So I'll turn it over to Christian to kick us off.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, so we'd like to invite our panelists to kick off our discussion and then open up the floor to anybody else that wants to share at some point here. But we do have a series of questions that we do want to pose. So I don't know, I'd like, Willie, can we invite Thaya and Karen and Dr. Manuel into the fold here and perhaps kick it off and say, we'd like to hear about a number of things. So I guess the first question that we have is, what's top of mind for your organization? We know the field is thinking about the future, and that means the summer, the fall, and beyond. So what are the things that are top of mind for your clients as managers, and just as you're thinking about it, any artists that are on the call, what's at the top of your mind right now? And I'll just
please introduce yourself as you speak.
Yes.
Happy to start. I'm Thaya Knowlton with IMG Artists. I'm a booking manager. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing glasses. I'm Caucasian, and I'm wearing a black shirt. My office is actually based in New York, but I live in Portland, Oregon. We live on the land of Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Klamath, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kapalua, Molalla, and many other tribes. It's a long list. It's a big area. I wanted to point out, this is something that we talk about obviously in our agency, and I know it's something that, I've spoken with Karen and Manuel about it as well, is that for us as agents, as we look at tours and things that have already been booked for the coming season, I think inflation and what's happened recently with costs for buses, for gas, the costs just in general of getting a tour and keeping it on the ground as being one part that's changing the financial reality for a lot of these artists for tours that were already booked and established. And then on the other side of it, having the conversations with the presenters who still aren't even fully staffed, don't fully have audiences back, and no longer have any of the funding coming in that's going to kind of counterbalance these lower ticket sales that we're seeing. And obviously, that Stephen and Christian showed with the graphs are still prevalent. So I think that's kind of like at the top of what I've been thinking about and conversing about with my colleagues.
Yeah. I'll jump in. Karen Fisher, light-skinned Caucasian woman with curly salt and pepper hair. I'm wearing a red coral necklace, red blouse, and calling in from Hawaii, from Maui, the islands of the Kanaka Oiwi, the native peoples of these islands. I run Pacifica Artist Network. My roster is largely Indigenous, mostly Native Hawaiian, and some Maori from Aotearoa from New Zealand. And it's multidisciplinary, so a lot of music, some dance, some spoken word. I agree with Thaya. June, we've had a little bit of a honeymoon period that we didn't quite realize, I think, with the SVOG money that a lot of us have benefited from, both as agents and as presenters and venues. And that ends June 30th. And so as my artists have been back on the road touring, and a lot of them have been doing full schedules, when we haven't seen the audience expectation, the same numbers of audiences that we used to see pre-pandemic, everybody was okay with that because, well, we all have the SVOG money to fall back on. We're going to be facing harsh reality, I think, with the coming season and the vagaries of audience behavior. The other thing that had come up in some of our discussions were, a lot of my artists, when they tour, there's a guarantee fee and there's a back end. And we've always been comfortable sharing that kind of risk, with the presenters that we work with. Partly, and it's always been a substantial, or that back end has been a substantial part of the fee. So so our artists have known that they can go out, they have a certain level of guarantee, but they know that they'll come back with a good back end. Touring from January to now, the guarantees have been in place, but we've seen a big reduction in back end because of audience sizes and the reduced audiences. The other thing that we're seeing is the audiences are buying tickets, but then somebody may have a positive COVID test, and so their group doesn't come to the performance. Do they get the refund back? I mean, it may affect the bottom line. It certainly affects, audience attendance, because there's these last minute, backing out of going to performances. So as the study is showing us, we are on a little bit of shaky ground there as well.
Well, I'll join in. One of my biggest nightmares from a contract I just received this morning. They added at the bottom their own, in red ink, COVID clause, in which they reserve the right to cancel and walk away from a performance for an international artist on a routed tour in the event that COVID flares up again. I was greatly relieved that they then went on to say that they would compensate the artist for any expenses they had already paid out and reimburse them for those funds. On the other hand, they then went on to say that they would not be willing to pay for the new airline tickets or the new visa fees to bring them back whenever the new performance dates are reorganized. So we're sitting here going, I guess we'll know in 9-10 months. Hopefully the coast will be clear and we'll get them all in and get them all back home again. But it's a very uncertain set of grounds that we're sitting on, and we figure we'll have to take the risk and go ahead and give it a try.
Maybe we can pick up with another question, Manuel, with you, because it's connected, right? So this is sort of a modified force majeure kind of clause, I guess. But for those that are tours that are getting out and you're seeing increased expenses in real time, as was mentioned at the top of the conversation, how are you dealing with that? Is that a presenter issue? Is it a shared issue? What's happening?
You mean with
Open to anybody on the panel.
with the costs of the traveling?
The travel in particular, or any other. I mean, we're dealing in an environment now with daily, certainly weekly inflation. So how's that impacting things?
In our case, we've just made a projection with a little cushion for error, and plopped it in and said, if our cushion isn't enough, somehow between the artists and the agency, we will find a way to reduce our income on one side or both and eat the difference in the increased cost. And I should back up, since everyone introduced themselves. I'm a Hispanic male with gray hair since I was 6 years old, and I live in Miami, Florida, the former ancestral lands of the Seminoles, with a preponderance of Cuban and Hispanics, about 40%, and probably about 40% Jewish, and the rest is everybody else. But we're happy to be here.
Yeah, regarding force majeure, the one thing I am seeing is the willingness of all of us to try to work together, because it impacts all of us. So there's been a slight attitude change, I think, even though I do get those contracts that say, if COVID flares up, we can pull out or whatever, but there seems to be a different attitude. The one change I'm seeing is that after a lot of discussion about, when a deposit is paid, now called, more of us are moving to first payment. Is that non-refundable to help cover costs in case of cancellation? And I'm seeing more contracts that acknowledge that first payment, as a payment and not something that's refundable. However, it comes later in the game. So rather than having a quote unquote deposit 90 days in advance, it might come 30 days in advance, but then it's a first payment on the fee. So it's kind of, there's this give and take going on, I think, between, in our negotiations about how to protect the tours in the face of the uncertainties of COVID.
And I just want to circle back to what Stephen was talking about too in the beginning, with the costs and how we're trying to balance them as agents, as managers, as artists, because just thinking about freight, getting, dance companies, anything that has to tour with more than just a bus, which is expensive enough around the country. We're trying, I think, to do a lot of negotiation early on with some companies to at least figure out the budget. And then if we have to change or renegotiate later, if, hopefully things get better, we can do that. But that's, I think, at least how we're trying to do some projection. And then on the presenting side of things, most of my artists generally do get a fee, a flat fee. But what I have seen is more of a move towards, well, I can't give you that fee, but I could give you this lower fee. And then if they sell, then I will give you X bonus or Y percentage, or we can work a versus deal, which is also, that is harder, obviously, on the artist side of things, because that brings down known income. And there's only ever so much that artists can do to help promote from their end in collaboration with the presenting organization, who's also working really hard on their end with limited staff to do the same. So I realize it's a give and take. So it just does feel, and I feel a few people have mentioned it's like a shifting landscape to see what's going to happen, and that this fall, spring 22, 23, the audience numbers are really going to be indicative of what 23, 24 looks like. Even if we're fully feeling out of COVID by that time, I think with inflation, with lack of attendance, you're going to see a major shift in how we do our business and what is the new norm.
And in terms of that cost factor, one of our groups got very clever, and they're in London, and they worked out a sponsorship situation with the airline so that regardless of price, the airline is locking in that they will transport them and bring them in for the recognition that they will receive in return at the various performances.
Very interesting. Thank you all. Perhaps want to shift gears here a little bit and talk, and it's tangential to this, but tell us a little bit about other experiences or methods that your artists have used that have changed in delivering programs, whether due to COVID or otherwise. Is there anything there that comes to mind?
I think that the emergence of all the virtual that had to happen during COVID has really helped in a way with some bookings where you can have advanced material sent, whether it be to schools or outreach or just the community in general as part of their marketing campaign. I see that as a big shift. And I definitely see that community engagement has just like skyrocketed as like the most important thing as part of being you. It's really hard to come in and just like do a date, do a show, and then you're out. There has to be something more engaging with the community, whether that's because someone's getting funding for it or that's just how they feel they're going to grow the audience base. Like that seems to be the bigger shift.
And there seems to be some greater interest in considering niche artists by community, identity, or ethnicity as a way to attempt to draw in or expand the audience by bringing in a new audience sector that they didn't have before. Which of course also goes hand in hand with the move towards all the EIDL stuff. But they're using it with their own best interests to try to generate more income from it.
And I'm seeing that as well, given the nature of my roster. And, and then on a purely mercenary level, we've gone back and forth with meet and greets, autograph, CD signings, all of that are usually, part of a performance. And it really depends on the region, on the artist, on the genre, whether artists are willing to meet the public or not meet the public. And that's kind of gone back and forth as COVID has risen and fallen.
I wonder if, because I really hear what you're saying, Thaya, about the outreach and the more engagement with the community being a really important thing that the presenters can offer to their audiences. Are you seeing that? But are you seeing that results in higher compensation for your artists? Because again, I also am seeing that it's like, okay, people are going back to, well, I can't give you what your artist was going to get in 2019, but I can give you this fee, again, plus bonuses or whatever. And I also need them to do these extra things. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing that the artists are being compensated for it, or are presenters basically subsidized, they're getting their help, but is that help that they're receiving being funneled to the artist?
I think that's artist dependent. So specifically you work with companies or dance companies that have contracts, and a dancer cannot do an excess, service without compensation. There is nothing I can do but say to a presenter, this has to be covered, because whatever was already paid to the company or what was agreed upon as a fee is just covering this. There are some other artists that just like, I would think about like Edgar Meyer and groups like that are just like, they just love the interaction. Like they're the ones that like may not want to necessarily do it right away, but like would be into it at the end. And just like, because that is who they are, right? And that's a personal thing, almost more so. But as an agent, you are always obviously fighting and pushing for your artists to always get paid and make sure that they're compensated, so that we're meeting in an equal place where the, you know, presenter is going to get what they need from it, but the artist isn't going to feel like they did all this work, right, for something that they can't even cover costs with.
Yeah, for my artists, the community engagement or ed services, it's been a part of the package for as long as I've had my agency. And so the fee that I quote includes at least one ed service of you know, one that works for the artist and works for that particular community, and that's negotiated. But it all happens at the front end, so that it's not, it gets a bit awkward if you do the booking and then there's this, oh, by the way, we want a school show, or by the way, we want a senior center visit or whatever. It gets a little trickier once you've quoted a fee to have those add-ons. But so usually I try to package that at least one service within the booking fee. And then if there's add-ons or a couple more days or residency, then those are add-on fees as well.
We do the same as Karen does.
Leah, thank you for bringing that up. And I want to take the opportunity to remind everybody online, if you'd like to just jump in and ask a question, we're getting there. Please just follow the stack protocol and Willie will get you in line. For the panel, let me just sort of pick up on this conversation, because we started to talk a little bit about what's changed, right? In the content frame, which we're not measuring so much from the survey, right? We're literally counting activity and behaviors and so on. And I think, Karen, your point about that, you know, community engagement's been in the game for a long time now. Certainly, we're hearing as we get 2 years past the initial shutdown in the sector, when while artists and art makers and producers and presenters had to find new and different ways to deliver, what are the carryovers? What's different than 2 years ago, if it's even possible to generalize?
Well, I was in a meeting earlier today, and something that I noticed that I'm sure was being done before, but which the conversation and the way it was presented gave me a very, very strong impression that it is now escalated and being done with far more attention and care. And that is a set of presenters within the same geographic area doing two things. One, discussing at great length what their programming might be for the next period to avoid any duplicity, so that they can maximize the ticket sales for that product. And so they're talking, you know, in great detail, and what kind of dance event and on what date, and then what about the local dance company and what's their schedule, and working really, really hard to ensure that they're not duplicating similar content. And then the other thing is, I was hearing them talk at great length about trying to, they themselves, coordinate block booking so that they can bring down the price for the artist, because they can offer them more favorable terms, and some of the big ones offering to represent and negotiate the other presenters, the rural presenters, to help them out and bring them into the mix, acknowledging that the little presenter may not have the money to go to APAP. So they're going to APAP and these conferences and scouting out talent for the smaller presenter that can't go.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, can I just
Krista, I
hop
know
in
you've
on
got
that?
a question.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Manuel. You know, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is this whole idea of risk, and how do we help the field to mitigate risk? And we've heard in various conversations, one way to do that is to reduce your overall costs. And by coordinating and collaborating more effectively, whether you're routing a tour or whether you're offering community engagement services with a smaller presenter that might be between two other larger stops. And so I'm just curious what you all think in terms of how do we encourage that kind of collaboration? What's needed by presenters or from other resources to facilitate that? And I'll just put it at that, because we've definitely heard, and I see Allie here from Arizona. We've been spending a lot of time with our consortia presenter leads. And because of the pandemic, they have spent a lot of time getting to know each other and working together, to your point, Manuel. So they are spending more time coordinating to ensure that they're working effectively. And I think the time is ripe where this could be a different kind of way that we think about touring and routing. So just wondering what the panel thinks about that and their thoughts.
One thing we did in Oklahoma when I was living there is that one of our major foundations became aware, and this was years ago before the pandemic, of the beneficial impact of being able to do block booking. And so they literally said, okay, Prestamo, if you will coordinate all of this and bring people together, we're going to give you a chunk of money, and you can put it in your college, university foundation, and you can wave the carrot at them saying, everybody voice what you want to bring, and if 2 or 3 of you get together, I'm going to give you $5,000 to help underwrite your block booking. And it worked very well, because they really were anxious to see if they couldn't pick up an extra $5,000 to bring down their costs without having to go through the Arts Council.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think for years there's been some really strong consortiums, Florida, North Carolina, SWAPOP in my territory specifically, that have always been really focused. They know how to work together. They know how to communicate with one another about what they want. They even subdivide out into venue sizes and such. But like, I agree. I think what Manuel brings to the table is like, there's now a lot of other presenting organizations throughout the country that are just starting to do it organically, that weren't consortiums before, that weren't organized before. And there's definitely a lot of calls now, more of like people saying, well, I spoke to so-and-so and they're doing this, and like, why don't we do X, Y, and Z together? Which is always great. As an agent, love it. It's a lovely way to like have somebody else also talking up artists with the colleagues that you work with. So I definitely see that as something that's been trending. And I saw a lot in the chat actually, which I just wanted to speak on, about school shows and outreach and everything. And I wanted to 100% agree that I think about 50% of school shows that I would normally do for next season got cut because there's no funding, there's no bus transportation to get them to the venue, or they can't get the artists to the school and the school has no way to present them at that school. So that the what has changed, I think, post-pandemic is people are really doing creative work with their outreach with the community. So it's not going to just be a school show. They're looking at different ways of doing it. And I don't mean just like, I miss school shows. My kids miss school shows. I want them back so much. But I think that's something also that's come out of the pandemic, is getting creative, right? About how that residency looks in your community, and how to do it and how to make it financially viable for everybody. So that would be my 2 thoughts.
Yeah, I might add, Hawaii has functioned the way that Manuel describes. We've been doing that for a long time, Alaska as well, because we've had to. Once you're shipping artists out here, it's worked really well to block book within the consortium. So we've been functioning here, that way for a long time. And it's a very efficient way to work, and it also spreads the resources, because there are, the larger organizations that can afford more, and the smaller organizations that want to bring artists to their community but can afford less. And so you kind of pool all the fees, and it makes it viable for the artist. We've had the same experience with school shows, that schools cannot bus kids in, or we've had school shows planned that we've had to morph some of the engagement activities 2 or 3 times in the course of a tour to make it work. But then we end up working with after school programs. And I agree with you, there's a lot of different ways to engage a community. And sometimes the artist has gone out to the schools, and less than great tech situations, but you still make it work because you're bringing something educational to the kids. Sometimes schools have been hesitant about having strangers come to the school. And so we've had to morph yet again and work with after school programs or boys and girls clubs or, other kinds of ways of working. And I think that's going to be in flux for a long time because of funding for busing. What can PTAs afford? What can students afford? Even though, the school shows are nominal fees, it still is an add-on in this economy. But yeah, I think it does open the door to thinking more deeply about what an artist can bring to the community, and hopefully not be a one-off. Hopefully, begins a relationship between the presenter and the community that continues in other ways with other artists.
Yeah, I think, Karen, that reinforces this notion that we suggested earlier, that we're not returning back to something we knew. We have to figure out what's next, what the reset is. I did want to thank David Ralph for his comment in the chat that your numbers are better. These are aggregate numbers of the people who responded, so necessarily will be different from one case to the other. But David, if you want to stick yourself in the stack and tell us what your experience is, that would be great to hear. And I think Willie, I saw somebody on the list, Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Grafsorian. I represent musicians from Europe and South America. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
You can.
Okay, good. Artists, I think, have been doing everything they can for this industry forever. And to ask more, they don't have a choice. If they're going to play, they have to live with the circumstances as they present themselves. It seems to me, something struck me about the front end of the pandemic that may be relevant now. And that's, we're going to have presenters making decisions in a few months, August, September of this year, using information from that time to project more than a year in advance. So I think we pretty much know what that picture is going to look like. And I sense that from the group here, that the following season, I get mixed up all the time with these dates, but the season that we'll be booking come this fall, not going to look so good. And it'll be at least another season before there's some chance at pre-pandemic activity. So maybe what presenters need, because we're completely subject to their health as agents and as artists. I remember all the talk about patrons donating their tickets when things went poorly. And I think I'm not a presenter now, I used to be, but I wonder how much of that really went on and how much of the constituents for the presenters stepped forward to bridge the gap when it first happened. And maybe there's a message like that that's needed now. And maybe the field needs some help, some marketing thinking, some language to appeal to the presenters' constituencies to help make this next step forward happen, instead of just everyone sitting there like, oh God, what's gonna happen? Because I think it's an uncertain time, and I can't blame a presenter for being cautious. The government funding going away, not going to come back probably. So this is really a moment of truth. And it seems to me there's a tremendous story there. I think that people who come out for concerts and for performances really do care about it a lot. But perhaps it's time to formulate a message that really speaks to the exact situation the presenters are in. Maybe something from APAPs, maybe some sort of thinking, and get some great marketing and copy people together to put out some suggested messaging so that it would help the presenters survive this next step, which then helps the rest of us survive.
Thanks, Michael. David, let's go to you as we approach the top of the hour here. And then I'll kick it back, I think, to Krista, to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily planning to speak, but I got dragged in. I'm happy to do it. And I just want to say Michael, I'm really intrigued by your comments just now. This idea of sort of a holistic view of the field and an approach to, or attempted approach maybe of how we can move forward. It's sort of something that occurred to me at the very, very, very early days of the pandemic, and maybe somehow we could all pull together. And that didn't maybe quite happen, but I do think, as you pointed out, donors, particularly from, for nonprofit performing arts organizations, stepped up big time, and then of course we got really, really wonderful support from the government, amazing support really from SFOG in particular. So all of that's helped a lot, but everybody's right here, that's all ending, and it'll be interesting to see what's down the road. I was asked to, maybe talk just a bit about my own experience with bookings and that sort of thing. And, as I said in the chat, I would be a little surprised and super concerned if the 45% number that was in the survey is really reflective of, say, 22, 23 bookings compared to pre-pandemic. If that's really true, it's way worse than I imagined. But I will say my own bookings are certainly noticeably down for 22, 23 from pre-pandemic. By that, I mean something on the order, it's hard to tell where it'll end up, 30%, 25%, somewhere in there, probably. Haven't looked that closely recently, but I've considered that, fine. And, after SFOG, that's not a problem. I'm much more interested in 23, 24, as people have suggested, and what that's going to look like. And that I agree again with what's been said, that how audiences look in the next few months, and particularly this fall, I think is going to inform that greatly. So not much more to say than that, just lots of unknowns. And we've been dealing with unknowns for 2.5 years. I guess we can do it a little bit longer.
Thank you, David. And you give me an opportunity to underscore how important the data collection is and the longitudinal look at the data collection. That's current bookings, right? So not necessarily forecast bookings. And I think maybe we'll adjust the question in our next issue to 2 parts, might reveal some stuff for us. We are always open to those suggestions of how we can gather data that's useful to the field. So we encourage all of you to share that through Willie and Krista. As always, as we come to the top of the hour and as I give it back to Krista, thank you to the panel. This is the first time we've done this. That was great. We really, really appreciate your insights. It adds so much color to the data. I look forward to actually being able to look at the transcript. I want to thank Malia and Jesse for being there for us, Willie and JG for running the tech and making this as smooth as it is, Christian for all the work that you've been doing with the respondents, all of you for taking the time to be here with us and doing the survey, and Krista, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I echo all of the thanks and gratitude for the voices here, for you filling out the survey, for your continual deliberation around that. And this panel has been great. So we'll continue to do that. I think that we'll want to also raise up some other voices this next time. You've raised up a lot of questions for presenters. How are they actually dealing with risk? How are they going to deal with budgeting? And what does that mean for the ways that tours and agents budget and think about their budgeting and contingency budgeting for 23-24? I feel like there's some more conversations that we need to lift up. So thank you for surfacing those issues. This is what's so great about having a discussion among your colleagues. So have a great day. I think we have a survey that will pop in the chat. We'd appreciate your feedback on today and ways that we can improve upon the sharing of data and insight for the field. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.